There's- Hello, friends, and welcome to the Crazy as Usual with Donna podcast, where we're all a little crazy. It's the normal ones that we worry about. You'll find this podcast to be short enough to consume on the drive to work and full of strategies you can apply to manage the monkeys today. So let's get crazy with Rebecca Hawkins, who is going to talk to us about regenerative workplaces. And if
Mhm.
you're like me, the word regenerative just stokes your soul. Rebecca, tell us why you chose that word in your business.
Yeah. In my last job in the corporate world, I worked in HR as a culture enablement consultant, and I attended an HR conference in 2020, a virtual conference, where I got to hear the CEO of Patagonia speak, who, if you know, is one of those companies that is incredibly purpose-driven and people-driven. And that was the first time I heard the phrase regenerative used in the context of people leadership. And essentially, Patagonia also, of course, is very planet focused. Then that's how they came to adopt this phrase. Regenerative is a word that's used in resource management circles quite often. So there's three approaches to resource management. You can be depletive, where you're basically stripping the land, stripping the water, stripping the ocean. You're using the resource till it's all gone. So think
Mhm.
farmlands and forestry and water management. You can be sustaining, which is really where the world is moving because we've realized depletive is not servicing the world, the
Right.
planet, or humans. So sustaining is trying to think about how you keep the land alive and let the field sit for a while to regenerate. But
Uh-huh.
regenerative is, how do I actually improve the resource that I'm managing? How do I improve the forest? How do I improve the ocean? How do I improve our water systems?
Yeah.
And Patagonia uses that as their approach to human resource management. So when we think of our employees and we think of our workplaces, how do we as organizations begin to shift our mindset to making better humans at work?
I love the the whole metaphor just speaks. I'm sure that everyone who hears this can envision a place where we've been depleted,
Mhm.
and a place that has allowed us a little time to regenerate. I I wonder what it would look like in the workplace to have a rhythm of life that is not just sustaining people, but constantly regenerating. So, what would a CEO do differently to make sure that environment is constantly regenerating the energy of its employees? What changes?
Yeah, I like to talk about making human-friendly workplaces. So when we think about how, by and large, companies came to be, the evolution of work, we think over the
Yeah,
last century or decades, we started, in farms and then moved to factories, and then later we've moved to office places. And during that evolution, we haven't really changed a ton in how we think about work. There are organizations already on the cutting edge of thinking differently, but companies are run based on a mindset of really treating humans like part of the industry, part of the factory, like machines. So a focus on performance, a focus on output, a focus on certain hierarchies of leadership that we work through and roles. And that hasn't actually worked for humans
hmm,
ever. I mean, obviously, when we were first in the Industrial Revolution, there weren't even unions and there were no labor laws, and we literally were depleting our humans, and we've gotten better. But science has taught us how humans actually thrive. We now know so much about the human brain and how the brain operates and what causes stress and burnout and mental health issues around us, what humans long for, what causes us to thrive, what actually motivates us, what inspires us, what lights us up inside. We've learned how humans operate, and workplaces are not actually designed to invest in what humans need to thrive.
hmm,
So we go to work, and kind of work throughout the week slowly sucks the life out of us, right? And then we kind of wait for the weekend, and the weekend is where we try to replenish and refill our cup and re-energize. And then we go back on Monday and we do it all over again. And it's this terrible cycle of exhaustion that we're all
right.
dealing with. And then if you kind of add to that the environment, the global environment, the stressors in the world around us, the volatility, the uncertainty, the mental health crisis that we're dealing with, just a lot of dissension and factions, wars and economy stress and drug addiction, so on and so forth. The amount of
Yeah.
stress that we're under as humans is really scaled. And so my vision is that workplaces become a place where humans actually get regenerated instead of depleted. And they do
Yeah.
that by focusing on what I call creating space. It's an acronym for my business, which is SPC. Humans have three core basic needs. They need safety, they need connection, and they need purpose.
Mm.
And so we can change how we run meetings. We can change how we make decisions. We can change how we measure performance. We can change our time off policies. There are lots of things that companies can change that are based on the science of what actually lights humans up inside and causes them to be filled instead of depleted at work, that they can bring their full self, that they have purpose and meaning, and they understand why they're doing what they're doing. A small example I like to share, this is really small, but I'm a subject matter expert specifically in resilience, psychological safety, and trust. And one of the common pet peeves I hear from organizations and leaders is when people aren't speaking up. They're not bringing their
Mm.
ideas. They're not sharing their concerns. They're not giving their feedback. And that's because they're afraid. Because
Yeah.
culture and most ways companies are built, first of all, punish people for actually speaking up. Don't
Yep.
actually get excited when you bring your feedback or your ideas or challenge the norms. But also, as humans, we are inherently afraid to put ourselves out there. Our identity is on the risk. Our
Yeah.
worth is on the risk. We are risk avoidant species. Our brains are wired to notice threat and avoid danger and keep us safe. So speaking up is dangerous. So, for example, in a meeting, rather than just saying, "Does anybody have any questions?" At which you will get crickets 9 out of 10 times, right?
Yeah.
Because, oh my gosh, if I have a question, I'm dumb. I could be the only one with this question.
Right.
All eyes are going to be on me, versus saying, what have I missed? What have I
Mm.
done wrong? What do I need to know before we move forward with this?
Mm.
Then you're signaling instead you're missing something
Uh-huh.
to as
Instead of they're missing something.
yeah,
Mhm.
I am missing something as the leader. So
Mm.
leaders modeling some humility, and also inviting voice, and you'll get more voices in the room. That's just a small example, but those are the kinds of practices I help leaders implement to help reduce threat in the workplace.
And talking about safety, that makes somebody feel safe. It creates space
Mhm.
and safety for someone to say, this one question I didn't hear in your presentation. And
Mhm.
um, I would imagine, and I'm a geek of the evidence in the workplace that
Mm,
shows when we take care of our employees, how much more productive they are.
absolutely.
I can imagine that just creating safety for people to communicate without fear of retribution alone would
Mhm.
really change a workplace. It
Yeah.
changed the dynamic of the team. Do you have any um, stories to share about that?
I have, first of all, the research that I base a lot of my work on, two books that I highly recommend. So I am a complete um, fan of Amy Edmondson, who is sort of the leader in the psychological safety work. She published a book called The Fearless Organization in 2018, based on her research. And she has multiple case studies of examples of how teams are more productive when there's more safety in the workplace. An example, a lot of her work came out of hospitals, first of all, and she was at the time trying to understand team effectiveness. She was just researching higher performing teams. What makes a higher performing team? And she went in with the hypothesis that in hospitals, the higher performing teams are the ones that make fewer errors because lives are on the line, right? So that's
Yeah,
how you would probably define performance as healthy patients.
yeah,
What she found in the research actually was this incredible correlation between teams that had the highest error rate and the
uh-huh.
higher performance and the better teams. And that was because of what she uncovered, and how she then discovered the importance of psychological safety is those teams didn't actually have more mistakes. They just talked about them more. They were more
Ah,
safe to bring them up. So more were
yeah,
reported, which means they were a learning team and they could adapt, and then they got
yeah.
better, and they actually saved more lives because they had more errors over time that were reported. So that was like a really powerful aha moment, in the importance of psychological safety. And the other book that I just love, that I recommend, is The Culture Code by Daniel Coyle. And he also outlines that he's researched hundreds and hundreds of companies that have high performing cultures and high performing companies. His most favorite one is Navy SEALs, which also Simon Sinek does a lot of work with, right? And
Yeah.
the three pillars that he identified of high performing, high culture teams, which is also kind of where my SPACE model, my SPACE acronym comes from, are belonging and purpose and vulnerability. That's what he
Yeah.
calls the three pillars. So there are multitude of case studies out there that show the teams that have these things are better long-term delivers, better retention, better talent acquisition, better production, and higher profit.
Yeah. Boy, that belonging kind of flags just a memory for me too. I just learned of a organization here in town that has a director of belonging role. I didn't even
Wow.
know that was a thing. So it's an evolution in even how we are managing the workplace to make sure that there's inclusion and belonging that's just built into the infrastructure.
Yeah.
Um, it- and I also thought of this example with um, the whole idea of leading with failure. And it's really a family kind of example. Several different parents have shared with me that when they're having that dinner table conversation after school with their kids,
Mhm.
they don't ask how was that test. They ask, what did you fail at today? It makes the conversation about failure just normal and open. And
Absolutely.
I think if we could start this earlier in in life in general, and I just had another call today with people who are really putting heads together to collaborate on how to get more mental health resources into the workplace, get more mental health resources into schools.
Hmm.
And it really boils down to being able to have a conversation about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, it it takes the crazy out of the conversation when you know that you're not alone. And that's why I wrote the book. You were my one of my first readers. And
Mhm.
and you were really good about challenging how this conversation happens, but it needed to be challenged. It needed to be better and more real so that people have a blueprint to know how can I engage with somebody in the workplace to talk about why I feel a little bit crazy about this. And it's just it's okay. It's normal.
Yeah. I love the
Ah,
word normalizing.
yeah. Yeah.
Amy Edmondson's second book has just come out and it's about failure. The whole book is about failure.
Oh,
And in the book Fearless Organization, the structure actually for my workplace policies and procedure improvement plan is based on her leader toolkit, which is the second half of the book. The first half of her book is research. The second half is practical application. And she has three pillars for psychological safety, the first of which is to set the stage. So it's just another words for saying normalizing. So you go in and you normalize failure. You normalize this work is complex. This
yeah.
work is there's a lot of uncharted territory. And so we're going to make mistakes. You set the stage ahead of time that you expect them as how you're going to learn and grow. And
Yeah.
she talks about three different kinds of failure and how leaders have to have a more nuanced approach to the three different kinds of failure. Not all failure is the same. There's some failure that's preventable. That's more about process breakdowns and lack of training. Like you should have seen this coming, but we can fix it through coaching and training. And then there's
Right.
complex failures that you really couldn't see coming because the nature of the work was so interconnected and
Yeah.
complex that you didn't really know this was going to happen. So you
Right.
learn from it. And then there's really failure that's intelligent, where you are in completely new territory and you have to try something. It's like invention and experimentation. And
Right.
those failures should actually be celebrated because every time you fail in a new environment, you learn. So I love that.
Absolutely.
Normalizing the whole conversation that we're
Mhm.
imperfect beings and the work isn't always going to be delivered exactly
Thank
correctly.
you for saying the word imperfect too, which is
Yeah.
also podcast production. I'm
Yes.
telling you. You know, it reminded me, my daughter who just got an engineering job, first job out of college, had her 90-day review and she was really nervous. And when her boss asked, how are you feeling come into this? She said, I feel really nervous. And he asked why. And she said, well, I've made some mistakes. And he gave her a quizzical look and said, it's your first job. You're brand new. I expect you to fail. I give you
Mhm.
room to make mistakes so you can learn.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
just like the the weight just lifted off her shoulders. Like, wow, I don't have to worry about having to do it perfect every time. Really?
Yes.
Oh. It doesn't mean that we work less hard. Wouldn't you say that that would actually free people up to be even higher performing?
It does. Yeah, the research shows that as well, that the highest performing teams have this balance between challenge and support. And so you don't want to just make it all cushy and comfortable all the time. People actually thrive with accountability and with standards and goals to set that they have to stretch to reach.
Yeah,
But the risk comes from not having the support as they struggle and try to get to those high goals. So there's
right.
like this grid, even in Amy Edmondson's book, between support and challenge. And when you have like high challenge with no support, that's a recipe for burnout. That's where
Hmm.
people get depleted. When you have high support, but no challenge, people can get lazy and, not really feel like they're growing and not have anything to strive for. It's where you have high both that you have the most high performing teams. And that's one of the
Yeah,
misconceptions that psychological safety is all about comfort. It's not about comfort. Psychological safety is actually uncomfortable because you're having difficult conversations about failure, about disagreement, but you're
yeah,
taking the social sting out by having supportive environments when those things happen.
right. Oh, I love that. I love
Mhm.
that. And boy, what a beautiful thing. It makes me want to start a business just so that I can implement this, but that's
Yay.
listen, I want to start a business just to prove to the world that something can happen. But I think this conversation gives people a vision for the possibility.
Mhm.
Um, and part of that is understanding how we're made. I love that you in our conversation earlier talked about the Enneagram and you struggle with the loud inner critic.
Yeah.
And I'm a 4. I struggle with having to be um, different, anything but normal, and be excellent at everything. I need everyone's approval. You
Mhm.
need everything to be perfect. So how do you navigate that just as an individual?
And I really want to be seen as good. Like, I'm like a reformer. I have a strong inner critic and somewhat of a strong outer critic. I want to make everything better. I want to make the world better.
Yeah,
And that makes me kind of a crusader, which is also a recipe for stress and burnout. I take on
yeah,
too much responsibility and I'm really hard on myself and I always see what's wrong and that stresses me out. I drew a word picture once for my husband so he could understand my brain. And it was just like this huge cloud of things. I wrote down all the things that I worry about or think about, so
wow,
he could see what I'm carrying all the time, kind of visually. And that's something I've had to struggle with and still have to struggle with. In fact, I'm a huge fan of Brene Brown, and her book, The Gifts of Imperfection is kind of a must
uh-huh.
read in my mind to
It's my
understand.
top. Hmm.
Right. And I have one of the wallpapers I sometimes put up on my computer on my wall is that imperfection is not a sign of weakness. It's a reminder that we're all in this together.
Yeah,
And so I try to keep that as a grounding truth that we're all imperfect beings. And that's actually what it forms our common humanity. But I've
yeah,
had to rewire my brain to get to that place. It's still a constant struggle. In fact, in this mission to help reduce employee burnout and stress and improve workplace well-being through how we look at our processes and how our companies are run, I often say I want to help companies get their employees off the hamster wheel because we're all kind of on this performance hamster wheel at work and in life, and it just kind of go, go, go. We're trying to prove our worth, prove our worth. I'm so familiar with that. And I recognize that for me to help companies do that, I have to get off the hamster wheel.
right.
Like I have to be able to role model and walk out what I believe to be true, which is that our worth and our value to the company and to the world and to ourselves is not tied to our output, our performance.
It's so true.
We are
And
beings who want to perform, but that doesn't define our worth. And I need to remind myself that all the time. I'm constantly getting back on the hamster wheel. It's not easy.
right. Well, when I stopped my job because I was just mentally and physically burned out, but it took me a few weeks to realize I was still on the wheel. I had not stopped to rest, to sleep
Mhm.
in, to take time off, to
Yeah.
get a little space in my life. I was just applying the same hamster wheel philosophy to the next thing.
Yep.
And even when we're starting our own business, we can do that.
So
And that can actually be worse because once we're on the hamster wheel of performance in our business, then it erodes our quality. Our energy is starting to flag, and so that we don't bring the same vitality to the work
yeah.
because we're just, well, remember the conversation we had about social media? We're just like, can we please have somebody handle that so we don't have to? Well, honestly, as a business owner, it makes sense to hire people. I need to hire a podcast producer to produce this podcast.
Yes.
So all I have to do is have fantastic conversations like this, and I don't have to do anything else.
Right.
And it gives me great peace in order just to say that out loud, because there's this expectation, oh, you gotta do all these things and get all these things in order, and you need to learn editing and like, no, I'm not an editor. And you and I don't have to start a business and hire 20 people in order to demonstrate what regenerative workplaces look like.
I
I
know,
think
I know.
we can work with CEOs to envision what it takes to have a high performing team and how to put that together. And I love what you bring to that. Um,
Mhm.
I know that we're getting a little bit towards the end of our time here, and so I want to make sure
Yeah.
and talk about the event we have coming up in January, where you're going to be on this panel of people talking about creating high performing teams, creating the space for high performing teams.
Yeah.
Um, if you have a room full of HR professionals and CEOs and mental health professionals, what are the like top three things you want them to walk away with?
Well, first, it's not an either or. You don't need to choose between your employees and your profit and your bottom line. It is a both and. In fact, the more you invest in creating space for your people to love coming to work every day, to being energized and equipped to be their best selves, to feel connected to purpose and to have safety to speak up and to feel connected to each other as a team, the more you're going to attract talent, retain talent, and get more out of your talent when they're there. It's like a
Uh,
win, win, win in every single way. I like to say in my business, on my business cards, thriving employees equals thriving companies, which equals a thriving world. And that's the
mhm.
ultimate mission and purpose of my doing this business is I want
I
to
know.
change the world through changing workplaces because we spend so much time at work. I really
Yes,
believe that when workplaces are energizing, we'll see less, domestic violence, less drug addiction, less active shooter situations, less
fewer
all
people
of it.
kicking the dog.
Right. Right. So
Right.
I want companies to really embrace that vision.